The Queen of Hearts lay face up on the sticky residue of a spilled cocktail, a silent monarch reigning over a kingdom of crumbs and condensation rings. It wasn't a tip. It was an insult. A final, theatrical flick of the wrist from the strange old man in the corner booth who had nursed a single cup of black coffee for 3 hours. For Maya, a waitress whose life was a frantic juggling act of overdue bills and her younger brother's mounting medical expenses, the card felt like a punchline to a joke she was too tired to understand. But this was no joke. This was a test, orchestrated by a man whose fortune could move mountains, a man searching for the one thing his billions couldn't buy, a worthy soul. Maya didn't know that her response to this simple piece of cardboard wouldn't just save her job. It would detonate a dynasty, disinherit 2 of the wealthiest heirs in the country, and rewrite the future of an empire. The restaurant was called The Gilded Cage, a once glamorous hotel dining room now clinging to its former glory with polished brass and faded velvet. It catered to the city's old money, a generation that demanded impeccable service, but tipped as if it were still 1955. Maya moved through the maze of tables with a practiced grace, her smile a well-worn mask that hid the gnawing anxiety chewing at her insides. Every clink of a glass, every cleared plate, was one small step toward the $3,000 she needed by Friday for the deposit on Leo's next round of treatment. Her brother's lungs were failing, and hope came with a price tag that grew more impossible each day. Table 7 needs a refresh, Jenkins. Now, barked Mr. Abernathy, the manager, a man whose posture was as stiff as the starched collar that seemed to choke him. And try to look like you enjoy serving people who are infinitely more successful than you will ever be. Yes, Mr. Abernathy, Maya murmured, her smile not wavering. It was then that the bell over the heavy oak door chimed, admitting a man who seemed to have wandered in from a different century. He was old, with a frayed tweed coat that smelled of rain and mothballs. His face was a road map of wrinkles, but his eyes, behind thick spectacles, were shockingly alert, a piercing blue that missed nothing. He moved slowly, leaning on a simple, unadorned wooden cane, and chose the darkest, most secluded booth in the back. Abernathy intercepted him before he could even sit. "Sir, this is a fine dining establishment. There's a coffee shop down the street more suited to your needs." The old man's gaze drifted from Abernathy's sneer to Maya, who was watching from across the room. "I just require a cup of coffee and a quiet place to read my paper," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "Our coffee is $12 a cup," Abernathy said, the words a clear dismissal. "I can afford it," the old man replied, his eyes twinkling with a secret amusement. Before Abernathy could escalate, Maya stepped in. "I'll take care of him, Mr. Abernathy. It's my section." She offered the old man a genuine smile, the first she'd felt all evening. "Right this way, sir. The corner booth is the quietest." The old man, who introduced himself only as Mr. Black, was a peculiar customer. He ordered the coffee, drank it slowly, and read a tattered paperback novel. Not a newspaper. He asked Maya her name. He asked her if she enjoyed her work. His questions were simple, but his attention was absolute. He listened as if her answers were the most important information in the world. For 3 hours he sat, a silent, unassuming fixture in her chaotic shift. When it was time to leave, he called her over. The bill was $12. He placed a 20 on the small black tray. Then, with a deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness, he reached into his coat pocket and produced a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts, and laid it on the table beside the bill. "What's this?" Maya asked, her brow furrowing. "A token," Mr. Black said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. for a Queen's service. He stood, gave a slight nod, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the card and the $20 bill behind. Maya stared at the card. It was crisp, new, the edges perfect. It felt heavier than it should. What in God's name is that? Abernathy materialized at her elbow, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. Did that vagrant leave you trash? He snatched the card from the table. A playing card? Is he mocking you? Mocking my establishment? He left a 20, Mr. Abernathy. It's an $8 tip, Maya said, trying to de-escalate. I don't care if he left a bar of gold, Abernathy hissed, his face turning a blotchy red. This is a symbol of disrespect. It suggests this place is a gambling den, a house of ill repute. You encouraged him, Jenkins. You and your bleeding heart theatrics. I ought to fire you for this. It was just a gesture, Maya pleaded, the word fire sending a jolt of ice through her veins. She couldn't lose this job. Not now. It was an insult, Abernathy corrected, his voice dripping with venom. He was about to tear the card in half, but Maya's hand shot out. Please don't. Abernathy froze, surprised by her sudden firmness. And why not? Maya didn't have a logical answer. It was just a feeling, a strange instinct that this card, this bizarre encounter, meant something. He called it a token, she said softly. It would feel wrong to destroy it. It was his way of saying thank you. Abernathy scoffed, throwing the card back on the table. Fine. Keep your precious trash. But this is your final warning, Jenkins. One more misstep, one more instance of you prioritizing charity over profit, and you're out on the street. He pocketed the $20 bill from the tray. This will cover the potential damage to our reputation. He stormed off, leaving Maya alone with the Queen of Hearts. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the elegant lines of the monarch's face. It felt warm, as if it held some residual energy from the old man. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out, her heart sinking as she saw the caller ID, St. Jude's Pediatric Care. Hello, she answered, her voice trembling. Maya, it's Dr. Evans. The voice on the other end was gentle but urgent. We need to talk about Leo. There's been a change. The floor of the gilded cage seemed to drop out from under her. A change was never good. His latest tests show the current treatment isn't as effective as we'd hoped, Dr. Evans explained, his words careful and measured. But a new gene therapy trial just opened up. The preliminary results are remarkable. It could be a real breakthrough for him, Maya. A tiny, fragile flower of hope began to bloom in Maya's chest. A breakthrough? You mean it could work? It has a very high success rate, but it's experimental, which means insurance won't touch it. The upfront cost for enrollment and the initial dose is... It's substantial, Maya. $25,000. The flower of hope withered and died instantly. $25,000. She might as well have been asked to produce a dragon's egg. She had $417 to her name. The $3,000 she was scraping together was just for the co-pay on his existing, failing treatment. I don't have that kind of money, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. I know, Dr. Evans said sympathetically, but they're only accepting 5 new patients, and the spots will fill up fast. If there's any way you can find the funds, this could be his best shot. The call ended. Maya stood frozen, the restaurant's muted chatter fading into a dull roar in her ears. $25,000. It was an impossible number, a wall she could never hope to climb. She looked down at the playing card in her hand. The Queen of Hearts stared back, her painted smile a cruel mockery of Maya's despair. She was about to shove it into her pocket when her thumb brushed against the surface. and she felt something odd. A tiny, raised pattern, almost imperceptible. She held it up to the light. There, pressed into the very fabric of the card, was an embossed emblem. It was a crest of some kind, a stylized falcon with its wings spread, clutching a key in its talons. It was elegant, intricate, and clearly the mark of a craftsman. This wasn't a card from a cheap deck. This was something else entirely. A new layer of mystery settled over the encounter, a tiny spark of curiosity in the vast darkness of her hopelessness. Who was Mr. Black? And why would a man in a frayed coat carry a card that was clearly so expensive and unique? 50 floors above the gilded cage, in a penthouse that was less an apartment and more a private stratosphere, Alistair Finch shed his disguise. The frayed tweed coat fell away to reveal a frame that, while thin and frail, was draped in a cashmere robe. The man Maya knew as Mr. Black was, in reality, the reclusive, notoriously eccentric billionaire head of Finch Industries, a global conglomerate with interests in everything from aerospace to private equity. He sat in a leather armchair that overlooked the entire city, a glittering tapestry of lights that he had, in many ways, woven himself. The wooden cane rested against the chair. It was not a prop. A terminal diagnosis of a rare bone cancer was slowly, inexorably turning him to dust. He had, at most, a few months left. Across from him sat Elias Vance, his lawyer and confidant for over 40 years. Elias was a man of quiet competence, his face a mask of professional calm that had weathered countless corporate storms. "She kept the card," Alistair rasped, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "And she defended it." "The manager, Abernathy, pocketed your tip," Elias reported, reading from a small notepad. "He also threatened to terminate her employment." "Insignificant," Alistair waved a dismissive hand. "The test was not for him. It was for her, the Queen of Hearts. Eleanor's card." His gaze drifted to a silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece. A woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "She always said you can judge a person's character, not by how they treat their equals, but by how they treat those they believe are beneath them. Maya treated a beggar like a king." "She passed, then?" Elias asked. "The first phase," Alistair confirmed. "But kindness is only one part of the equation. I need to know if she has integrity. I need to know if she has a spine." He coughed, a dry, rattling sound that shook his entire body. "My children certainly don't." As if on cue, the penthouse doors burst open and Caspian and Seraphina Finch swept in. They were Alistair's only children, twins who had been born into a world of impossible privilege and had curdled it into monstrous entitlement. "Father, what is this nonsense I'm hearing from security?" Seraphina demanded, her voice sharp and brittle. She was a vision of cold, sculpted beauty, dressed in an outfit that cost more than Maya's car. "You slipped your detail again? You were seen wandering into some diner." "I was conducting business," Alistair said calmly. "Business?" Caspian scoffed. He was handsome in a predatory way, with his father's blue eyes but none of their warmth. "You're playing your little games again, aren't you? Trolling the city for some noble peasant to anoint. It's pathetic. This company needs a steady hand, not a dying man's sentimental whims." "That steady hand will not be yours, Caspian," Alistair said, his voice quiet but laced with steel. "You think of the company as your personal ATM, and you, Seraphina, see it as a stage for your vanity. Neither of you has ever created a single thing of value. You are heirs, not architects." "We are your blood," Seraphina cried, her perfect facade cracking. "You would leave your life's work to a stranger over us?" Blood is not a qualification, Alistair countered. Eleanor and I built this empire on a foundation of honor and innovation. You would turn it into a sty of greed and nepotism. The test continues, and you two will stay out of it. Or what? Caspian challenged, stepping forward. You'll cut us out? The board would never stand for it. The shareholders would revolt. Don't test me, boy, Alistair whispered, his eyes blazing with the last embers of his formidable power. You have no idea the lengths I have gone to in order to protect my legacy from you. Defeated for the moment, the twins retreated, their faces masks of cold fury. As they left, Serafina turned to her brother. Find out where he was. Find out who he spoke to. I want a name. This noble peasant is going to learn that getting between a Finch and their inheritance is a fatal mistake. Back in the penthouse, Alistair turned to his lawyer. They will try to interfere. They'll be looking for her. You must get to her first, Elias. Initiate Phase 2. The offer? Elias confirmed. Yes, Alistair said. Offer her the money. $10,000. A fortune for someone in her position. See if her integrity has a price tag, and if it doesn't... He paused, a flicker of something that looked like hope in his tired eyes. If it doesn't, then we may have finally found the one. The next evening, Maya was polishing silverware in the back of the restaurant when Mr. Abernathy summoned her. You have a visitor, Jenkins, in my office. He says it's a legal matter. Don't think for a second that I don't know you're in some kind of trouble. In the cramped, cluttered office, a man in an impeccably tailored suit stood waiting. It was Elias Vance. He had a calm, serious face and held a leather briefcase. Miss Maya Flores? He asked. Her name was Flores, not Jenkins. He had done his research. Yes? She said, her heart pounding. Was this about debt collection? My name is Elias Vance. I am an attorney representing an anonymous client, the gentleman you served last night, whom you knew as Mr. Black. Maya's eyes widened. Is he all right? He is fine. In fact, he was deeply moved by your kindness and your defense of his small token, Elias said, a slight smile touching his lips. He has instructed me to present you with this as a more formal expression of his gratitude. He opened his briefcase and took out a thick envelope. He opened it and fanned out the contents on Abernathy's desk. 10 stacks of $100 bills. $100,000. Maya stared at the money, her breath catching in her throat. It was an unreal amount, a fantasy sum. It was 4 times what she needed for Leo. It was enough to change everything. $100,000, she stammered. Yes, Elias said, watching her reaction closely. It is yours, no strings attached. All you have to do is sign this simple document. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a non-disclosure agreement. It merely states that you will never speak of your encounter with my client to anyone, and you will make no attempt to contact him in the future. Maya looked from the money to the document. This was it. The answer to her prayers, a lifeline thrown from a stranger. She could save Leo. She could quit this job. She could finally breathe. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking. She could just sign it, take the money, and disappear. Mr. Black clearly wanted to be left alone. It was the sensible thing to do. But her eyes fell on the Queen of Hearts, which she had tucked into the frame of a small photo of Leo on the desk. She thought of the old man's piercing blue eyes, the way he had listened to her. He hadn't treated her like a servant. He had treated her like a person. And this transaction, this felt different. It felt like being paid to forget someone. It felt like putting a price on a moment of genuine human connection. Why? She asked, putting the pen down. Elias raised an eyebrow. "I beg your pardon?" "Why is it so important that I forget him?" she asked, her voice gaining strength. "This isn't just gratitude, is it? This is hush money." She looked him directly in the eye. "And what about the crest on the card, the falcon and the key? What does that mean?" Elias Vance's professional composure finally broke. A flicker of genuine shock crossed his face. He hadn't expected her to refuse. He certainly hadn't expected her to notice the crest. Alistair had told him about it, but he'd assumed it was too subtle. "You are a very perceptive young woman," he said slowly. "I'm a waitress," Maya countered. "I'm paid to notice details. I can't sign this. I can't take his money." "Are you insane?" Abernathy, who had been listening from the doorway, burst in. "It's $100,000, you fool! Sign the paper!" "No," Maya said firmly, pushing the money back across the desk toward Elias. "Please tell Mr. Black that I am grateful for the offer, but his kindness to me was not a transaction. I will not turn it into one now. Tell him I hope he is well, and that his token, the Queen of Hearts, meant more to me than this money ever could." It was the hardest decision of her life. She was turning away the only hope she had for her brother, all for a principle she couldn't even properly articulate. It was a choice born of instinct, of a deep-seated belief that her dignity and the dignity of the old man was not for sale. Elias Vance stared at her, a slow, profound smile spreading across his face. He packed the money back into his briefcase. "I will deliver your message, Miss Flores," he said, his voice filled with a new, deep respect. I believe it is the one he was waiting to hear. He was about to say more, to finally reveal the truth, when the office door was thrown open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Caspian and Serafina Finch stood there, their faces triumphant and cruel. Behind them were two burly security guards and a sleazy-looking man holding a camera. "Well, well, well," Serafina purred, her eyes scanning the scene. "Trying to pay off the little gold digger, Elias. Too late." Caspian pointed a finger at Maya, his expression one of pure contempt. "That's her, Maya Flores, a professional con artist who preys on the elderly and infirm." "What are you talking about?" Maya gasped, stepping back. "Oh, don't play innocent," Caspian sneered. He threw a stack of photographs onto the desk. They were pictures of Maya, clearly taken with a long lens camera. Maya walking near other five-star hotels. Maya sitting in a park, frequented by the city's wealthy retirees. They were photos of her daily commute, twisted into something sinister. "We've been tracking you. You have a pattern. You find wealthy old men. You play the part of the poor, virtuous girl, and you worm your way into their lives." Abernathy's eyes lit up, sensing a shift in power. "I knew it. I knew she was trouble," he exclaimed, eager to align himself with the newcomers. "She was acting suspiciously with the old gentleman last night." "We have a witness," Serafina added, gesturing to a woman who had followed them in, a former waitress Abernathy had fired last month. "She told me all about it," the woman said, avoiding Maya's eyes. "Said she had a new Mark, an old rich guy she was going to fleece." It was all lies, a perfectly constructed, utterly devastating web of them. "That's not true," Maya cried, looking to Elias for help. But Caspian was already playing his trump card. "And we know all about your sick little brother," he said, his voice dropping to a malicious whisper. "It's the perfect sob story to manipulate a dying man, isn't it? How much did you get out of our father before we caught you? Did you drug him? Threaten him?" "My firm will sue you for slander," Elias boomed, stepping in front of Maya. "Your firm works for our father, who is clearly not of sound mind," Serafina shot back. "We are taking control of his affairs to protect him from predators like this. She turned to Abernathy. You need to fire her, immediately, and we're calling the police. We're filing a report for elder fraud and attempted extortion. Abernathy didn't hesitate. Jenkins, Flores, whatever your name is, you're fired. Get your things and get out. I want you off the premises before the authorities arrive. The world spun. One moment, she was making a stand for her integrity. The next, she was being framed, accused, and destroyed. The security guards stepped forward, their presence menacing. Humiliated and jobless, with the false accusations ringing in her ears, Maya was grabbed by the arm and forcibly escorted out of the office. As she was dragged through the dining room, past the staring eyes of her former colleagues and customers, she clutched the only thing she had left from the encounter, the Queen of Hearts. It felt cold and useless in her hand. Her last hope for saving Leo was gone, replaced by the terrifying prospect of a police station and a world that now saw her as a criminal. Through the glass doors of the gilded cage, she saw the triumphant smirk on Serafina Finch's face, a perfect picture of victory. She had lost. She had lost everything. The cold night air hit Maya like a physical blow as the heavy oak doors of the gilded cage swung shut behind her. The sound, a final, definitive slam on her life as she knew it. The doorman, a man who had shared cigarettes with her on breaks, now looked away, his face a mask of awkward pity. Humiliation burned hotter than the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. She was jobless, penniless, and now a branded criminal. The city lights blurred into a cruel, glittering smear. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, to dissolve into the anonymity of the streets. But then her thoughts flew to Leo, his small, fragile body in a hospital bed, waiting for a miracle she could no longer provide. The thought of his face, his trusting eyes, was an anchor in the swirling chaos. It stopped her from breaking. It forced her to think. She stumbled to a nearby bus stop, sinking onto the cold plastic bench under the weak orange glow of a street lamp. Her hands were shaking. She opened her palm and stared at the Queen of Hearts. This simple piece of cardboard was the epicenter of the earthquake that had just shattered her world. It was trash, a curse, the reason for her ruin. She was about to crumple it, to hurl it into the gutter. But something stopped her. It was the memory of Mr. Black's eyes, the quiet dignity in his voice when he called it a token. It was the only thing she had left of that strange, hopeful moment. Her fingers, numb with cold and shock, traced the embossed crest again, a falcon clutching a key. It wasn't just a detail, it was a signature. In a city built on brands and legacies, a symbol like that meant something. It was a thread, and right now, it was the only thread she had. The next morning, after a sleepless night on a friend's lumpy couch, Maya walked into the main branch of the city's public library. The air inside was warm and smelled of old paper and quiet ambition. She found a computer terminal in a secluded carrel, her heart pounding, with a mixture of dread and a desperate, flickering hope. She typed a description into the search bar. Crest falcon holding key. The results were a deluge of medieval history and fantasy art. She refined the search. Crest falcon key corporate logo. The screen refreshed, and there it was, the third result down. The emblem was unmistakable, rendered in sharp, digital chrome. It was the official logo for Finch Industries, a global conglomerate with a headquarters that pierced the city's skyline, a modern-day castle of glass and steel. A new search for Alistair Finch brought up a gallery of images. Most were decades old, showing a powerful, sharp-featured man with piercing blue eyes. But one was more recent, a grainy, candid shot of a frail, elderly man in a tweed coat being helped into a car. His face was a road map of wrinkles, but the eyes behind the thick spectacles were the same. It was him. It was Mr. Black. The pieces slammed into place with dizzying force. The man in the frayed coat wasn't a vagrant. He was a king in disguise. And the two people who had destroyed her, Caspian and Seraphina, their faces now staring back at her from an article titled "The Finch Heirs, A New Generation of Power," were his children. This wasn't a random act of cruelty. It was a war for an empire, and she had been turned into a casualty on the battlefield. The $100,000 from Elias Vance wasn't hush money. It was another test, a test of her character, which she had passed, only to be ambushed by those who had clearly failed. Anger, cold and pure, replaced her despair. They had underestimated her. They saw a poor waitress, an easy target to be swatted away. They didn't see a woman who had fought for every scrap of her life, a woman who knew how to survive. They didn't know what she was willing to do for her brother. She knew she couldn't approach Finch Tower. She was a pariah. She needed to reach the one person who knew the truth, Elias Vance. Calling his prestigious law firm was out of the question. The twins would have eyes and ears everywhere. She needed another way in, a side door. She began to search for him, digging through old articles, interviews, and alumni newsletters. For hours she read, learning about the man who had offered her a fortune. He was a creature of habit, a man of tradition. Tucked away in a 20-year-old profile in a legal journal, she found it. A single sentence in a long article about his pro bono work. When the complexities of corporate law become too much, Vance says he finds clarity among the classics at the Athenaeum, the city's oldest private law library. The Athenaeum was a formidable stone building, a bastion of old money and older laws. A membership was required for entry, a barrier she could never hope to cross. But she was a waitress. She knew about service entrances. She walked around the back of the building and found a small, unmarked door next to a loading bay. A young man in a rumpled uniform was outside, smoking a cigarette. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice steady. "I have a delivery for a member, Elias Vance. It's urgent." The young man eyed her suspiciously. "We don't accept personal deliveries at the back." "His office sent me," she lied smoothly. "It's a confidential legal document. They said to hand it directly to him or to the head librarian, a Mr. Abercrombie." She had found the librarian's name on the Athenaeum's website. The specific detail made her story more plausible. He grumbled but relented, letting her into a narrow hallway. "Wait here, I'll see if he's in." A few minutes later, an elderly, bespectacled man, Mr. Abercrombie, appeared. "You have a delivery for Mr. Vance?" "Yes, sir," Maya said, holding out a small sealed envelope. Inside was not a legal document, but the Queen of Hearts. On the back of the card, she had written just 5 words. "A Queen's service requires counsel." Abercrombie took the envelope and disappeared. The wait was agonizing. She imagined him opening it, seeing the card and throwing it away. She imagined security arriving to escort her out. But 10 minutes later, Elias Vance himself walked down the hallway. His face was grim, but his eyes held a spark of recognition and relief. "Miss Flores," he said, his voice a low whisper. "I've been trying to find you. They've blocked my calls to you, put a tail on my car. They've filed a motion to have their father declared incompetent and me removed as his legal representative." "They framed me," Maya said, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "They used a fired waitress and fake photos." "I know," Elias said, Alistair anticipated they would fight dirty. He just didn't know you would be their target. He looked around the cramped hallway. We can't talk here. Alistair kept a safe place, a small office he rented under a different name decades ago. No one knows about it. Meet me there in 1 hour. He gave her an address on a slip of paper. Alistair chose you, Miss Flores. He believed you had a spine. Now, we must prove him right. The safe office was a small, dusty room above a bookbinder's shop, a relic from a time before digital surveillance. Elias explained everything. Alistair's diagnosis, his profound disappointment in his children, and the series of tests he had devised to find a worthy successor, not to run his company, but to steward its vast philanthropic foundation, the heart of his true legacy. The Queen of Hearts was his wife, Eleanor's favorite card, a symbol of compassionate strength. Maya was the final candidate, the only one who had passed every stage. The twins are moving fast, Elias explained, pacing the small room. They've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow afternoon at Finch Tower. They're going to present their evidence against you and use the company's morality clause to have you permanently barred from any involvement. They will use their father's lapse in judgment as proof of his incompetence and seize control of the entire estate. So we need to prove they lied, Maya said, her mind racing. The woman they paid off, the one who worked at the restaurant. Her name is Tina. Abernathy fired her for stealing. Finding her is a start, but it will be her word against the children of a billionaire, Elias countered. We need something undeniable, something that exposes not just the lie, but the malice behind it. He stopped pacing and looked at Maya. Alistair was a brilliant strategist. He always built contingencies into his plans. He knew his children. He knew their greed. He must have left us a weapon. They began to think, to dissect the encounter at the gilded cage. The frayed coat, the cane, Maya murmured, picturing the old man. They seemed like simple props. Alistair never did anything simple, Elias said, a slow smile spreading across his face. His personal security team, Blackwood, outfits him with state-of-the-art protective technology. It's usually disguised. Pens, watches. His eyes lit up. The cane. It wasn't just a walking stick. It was a panic button, a GPS tracker, and a high-fidelity audio recorder. Within minutes, Elias was on a secure line to the head of Blackwood Security. The cane had been retrieved from Alistair's penthouse, its contents secured. The recording of Maya's entire 3-hour interaction with Alistair was pristine. It captured her genuine kindness, her patient answers, her defense of the card against Abernathy's tirade. It was powerful proof of her character. This exonerates you, Elias said, after listening to the file. But it doesn't incriminate them. We need to catch them in their own trap. They used a sleazy photographer, Maya recalled. He was with them in the office. If we can find him, we can, Elias said, his mind already working through the angles. Caspian is arrogant. He uses the same fixers for all his dirty work. I know who he is. The plan came together quickly, a daring piece of legal theatre. First, Elias's team located Tina, the fired waitress. Confronted with evidence of her own past thefts and offered a generous sum from a contingency fund Alistair had established for this very purpose, she quickly agreed to tell the truth. Next, they tracked down the photographer. He was even easier to flip. Faced with conspiracy and fraud charges, he handed over not just the original, undoctored photos of Maya's innocent commute, but also a hidden recording from his phone. It was the jackpot. Caspian and Serafina, in their car after leaving the restaurant, laughing about how easy it was to ruin a nobody and bragging about the lies they were going to tell the board. They had all the pieces. The Kane recording to prove Maya's innocence, the photographer's recording to prove the twins' guilt, and the sworn affidavit from a recanting witness. It was a perfect, three-pronged attack. The next afternoon, the main boardroom on the 50th floor of Finch Tower was electric with tension. The long obsidian table was surrounded by the 12 board members of Finch Industries, powerful men and women who looked grim and uncertain. At the head of the table, Caspian and Serafina sat like monarchs, presiding over a coup. "As you can see from the dossier provided," Serafina said, her voice smooth and confident, "this woman, Maya Flores, is a professional grifter with a history of targeting vulnerable, wealthy individuals. Her manipulation of our father in his ailing state represents a grave threat to the stability and reputation of this company. We have a signed confession from a former associate of hers," Caspian added, gesturing to a document, "and photographic evidence of her stalking other potential targets. Therefore, we are moving for an immediate and permanent injunction, invoking Bylaw 7, Section C, to protect the company from her influence." The board members murmured their assent, looking at the damning, fabricated evidence. The vote was about to be called when the heavy doors to the boardroom swung open. Elias Vance strode in, followed by Maya. She was not dressed as a waitress. She wore a simple, elegant, dark blue dress that Elias's assistant had provided. Her hair was pulled back, and her expression was not one of fear, but of profound, righteous anger. "This meeting is a farce," Elias announced, his voice booming through the silent room. "You have no standing here, Vance," Caspian snarled, rising from his chair. "Security, remove these people." "I wouldn't do that," Maya said, her voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable authority that made the guards hesitate. She walked to the table and placed the Queen of Hearts in the center, on the polished black surface. "Mr. Finch left me this. He called it a token for a queen's service. You see it as a playing card. He saw it as a symbol of character. Let's talk about character, shall we?" One by one, Elias presented their evidence. First, Tina's video deposition played on the main screen, her tearful confession detailing how the Finch twins had paid her $5,000 to lie. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Next, Elias displayed the photographer's original time-stamped photos, showing Maya simply walking from the bus stop to her apartment, juxtaposed against the cropped, misleading versions the twins had provided. "This is slander, doctored evidence," Serafina shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "I agree that evidence can be doctored," Elias said calmly, "but audio is much harder to fake." He pressed a button on his tablet. First, the room filled with the warm, ambient sounds of the gilded cage. They heard Alistair's gravelly voice and Maya's gentle responses. They heard her defense of him, her quiet dignity. Then came the final, devastating recording from the photographer's phone. Caspian's voice, clear as a bell, filled the boardroom. She actually fell for it. The poor, virtuous girl. "The board will eat it up. By the time we're done, she won't be able to get a job washing dishes." Serafina's cruel laughter echoed through the silent room. Father and his pathetic little tests. He wanted a soul? Fine. We'll show the board the soul of a manipulative viper. No one gets between us and what is ours. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and damning. Every board member stared at Caspian and Serafina, their faces a mixture of shock and utter disgust. Serafina had gone pale, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Caspian's face was a mask of purple rage. His empire, his birthright, had been dismantled in less than 10 minutes by a waitress and a playing card. "My father's test was not to find a new CEO," Maya said, her voice ringing with clarity. It was to find someone to protect his legacy from you. You failed. Suddenly, a screen at the far end of the room flickered to life. Alistair Finch appeared, not live, but in a video recorded weeks earlier. He looked frail, but his eyes burned with their old fire. "If you are seeing this," he said, his voice raspy but strong, "it means my children have done exactly as I predicted. They have chosen greed over family, cruelty over decency. They have proven themselves unfit to carry my name, let alone my company." He looked directly into the camera. "The board will vote to remove Caspian and Serafina Finch from their positions and nullify their inheritance, effective immediately. Elias will present you with the amended documents. My entire fortune and controlling interest will be placed into a new trust, the Eleanor Finch Foundation, dedicated to alleviating medical debt for families in need. Its sole executor and chairwoman will be Maya Flores." He paused, taking a rattling breath. She did not seek power or wealth. She was offered a fortune and chose integrity. She was offered a fight and chose to protect the vulnerable. She is not an heir of my blood, but she is the heir to my values. That is the only inheritance that matters. The video ended. It was over. The twins were ruined, their names a synonym for disgrace. As security finally escorted them out, their faces streaked with tears of fury and humiliation, Caspian's eyes met Maya's. He saw no triumph in her gaze, only a quiet, resolute sorrow for what they had thrown away. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of what was once the Gilded Cage Hotel was filled with light and laughter. The faded velvet had been replaced, the brass polished to a brilliant shine. It was no longer a restaurant for the city's elite, but the headquarters of the Eleanor Finch Foundation. Maya stood at a podium, not in a waitress uniform, but in a simple, professional suit. She looked out at a crowd of families, parents, and children whose lives had been saved from financial ruin by the Foundation's work. Leo, healthy and vibrant, sat in the front row, beaming at his sister. The Foundation had become a beacon of hope in the city. Maya had proven to be a natural leader, not because she knew finance, but because she knew people. She ran the multi-billion-dollar trust with the same simple principle she had used at the restaurant: treat everyone with dignity. Caspian and Serafina were a distant memory, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Stripped of their fortune, they had turned on each other, their remaining assets devoured by lawsuits and legal fees. Last Maya had heard, Serafina was living in a small, rented apartment, while Caspian had been spotted trying to talk his way into an exclusive club, only to be turned away at the door. After her speech, Maya walked through the hall, stopping to talk with a young mother holding a baby. She listened intently, her attention absolute, just as Alistair had once listened to her. Later that evening, she stood alone in her new office, which overlooked the city. On her desk, preserved in a simple glass case, sat the Queen of Hearts. It was a reminder that a person's true worth is not the hand they are dealt, but how they choose to play the cards.